Hello, good evening. Welcome to the 2022 Members Night for the Denver chapter of the Colorado Archaeological Society. Tonight, as part of our Members Night, we are also celebrating our 75th anniversary as a chapter. I'd like to welcome those who have joined us in person. Hello, it's good to see everyone. And also those who are joining us virtually as well. Thank you for attending. As part of the event this evening, and in celebration of the 75th anniversary, we'd like to take this opportunity to reflect with some of our past presidents on what the organization has meant to them, and also have a discussion on what they'd like to see out of the organization in the future. I think that you'll see that one of the strengths of our organization is the diverse background of our members, and that's reflected in our former presidents as well. They've taken many roads and paths to join the organization, and I think that's one of the strengths that enhances our organization as well as the study of archaeology. Our first presenter this evening is Sharon Murphy. Sharon is currently serving as the president of the state chapter for the Colorado Archaeological Society, and in the past has served as the president for the Denver chapter. Since joining in 1988, her interest in Colorado archaeology has only grown, not only from the many connections that she's made within the organization, but also from the man who would become her husband. Her contributions to the society cannot be understated, and her involvement has often been focused on maintaining the organization and the functionality of the society, as well as organizing the membership.
I first came to CAS when Terry and I started dating. He was active in CAS and had been for several years, and he took me to dig an encampment that they were doing in Montezuma County the summer after we started dating. That was great fun. The encampments were great fun. And I started coming to Denver chapter meetings probably in about 1988 and have been coming pretty regularly ever since. Well, thinking about Denver CAS, I've always enjoyed committee meetings, which is not true for everyone. But so I served as a director for a few years and got to know people better that way than otherwise. And then served as assistant treasurer and secretary, and eventually in 2008 as the chapter president. When Denver CAS was working on Swallow Site, we had an open house, invited the public, and it was a weekend event. And my job at that time was helping to direct traffic because it was narrow access. I have learned a lot about archaeology in the years that I've been coming, but I probably don't have the depth of archaeology knowledge that some of the others do. I have done a little bit of excavation in Montezuma County that I mentioned earlier. Worked out at Swallow Site just a little bit. Did a survey at Plains Conservation Center. But my main focus has really been with committee work and projects that were more social to build fellowship and connection. Some in CAS come for the sharing of archaeological knowledge. Some come for sharing the enthusiasm for archaeology, which I certainly enjoy. And some because they've developed friendships here over the years, whether that's been with chili cook-off, with the annual dinner that we had for several years in May, with favors and a special speaker and such, with projects for the Alice Hamilton Scholarship Fund. That's probably where I have spent the majority of my energy is with the Alice Hamilton Scholarship Fund, which is coordinated through State CAS. We've had people who won scholarships here in the Denver chapter. That scholarship has been providing funds to students since, I'm going to say, about 1994 or so, or a little bit earlier actually. And I've served on that committee from 1994 to the present time. Actually, I had given some thought when I was jotting down some memories for Terry and me to think about of the people that I have thoroughly enjoyed. Whether that it was Bill Hammond, Teresa Whedon, who led trips to the Ute Mountain Tribal Park. Bill not only worked on Swallow Site, he also did pottery in his later years and contributed pots for silent auction for Alice Hamilton Scholarship Fund. Ken Andreessen, who led the PAC committee for years. And Betsy Whitecamp, who helped really shepherd the last time that Denver was hosting the State CAS meeting in the fall. It's the people that I remember. And I probably, oh, and I should mention one more. Bob Rushforth, who has been a steady contributor to CAS organizational things. I said I was a committee person, to organizational details of CAS since the 1970s. These are the people, some living, some not, that I remember when I think about CAS.
Terry Murphy. In 1979, Terry joined the Colorado Archaeological Society after he learned about it through the Douglas County School District Adult Education Program. He took a class on archaeology that was being taught by a CAS member, Harry Quinn. This led to a long relationship with CAS, in which Terry has held nearly every position within the CAS organization, including president of both the Denver and state chapters.
Probably the most memorable was the McPhee Dolores project. CAS worked on it, and it was a total project for CAS. All the chapters had people participating. We went down, we camped down there at the reservoir for the Cortez Reservoir, and we left our, I had a trailer at this point, and I left it down there for other people to use, and went back down a couple of times to work on this. So we were involved in the McPhee, the Dolores project. It was a huge undertaking, and it's probably the most memorable, although there are others, the Blackfoot Caves, the ranches here in the foothills, and they stand out too. It's discovery. It's the thrill of discovery. The old CAS, there's a difference between old CAS and new CAS. The old CAS was made up of semi-professional professionals. And the new CAS is made up of people who are interested but are not interested in the professional aspects of it. And so that there are so many of them. Ivo Hager, Ray Lyons, Terry Quinn. I could go on and give you a list of names that would be a couple of sheets of paper long, but have made a difference. I think one thing that people are not aware of is that the Southwestern Lore, the publication of Cass, was the longest single-running publication in the archaeological anthropological area. All the others dropped off, particularly in World War II. Cass continued to publish. We have the longest continuous publication in Cass in archaeology. My memory is filled with people, and there's so many people that were a part of it, and it's the professional, semi-professional aspect of it that I find so fascinating. I feel like I have contributed over the years to the upgrading of archaeology, all the way from dig, shovel, and shovel and dirt archaeology up through the interpretation of rock art. The rock art was not even considered when I started Cass, and it's become a major part of Cass and of archaeology in general.
Gordy Tucker Jr. Gordy is a professional archaeologist who first joined the Chipeta chapter nearly 40 years ago after graduating from the University of Colorado and moving to Montrose. It was there that he first learned about the Colorado Archaeological Society and quickly joined. After his work in Montrose ended, he moved to Aurora and quickly joined the Denver chapter. After a short while, he also became the president of the Denver chapter.
As soon as I got out of college, I went to school in Boulder. My family and we moved to Montrose, Colorado. And I had a experience working volunteer efforts at various places before. And when I got to Montrose, I heard about the Colorado Archaeological Society and the Chipeta chapter. I hadn't really known much about it before I got there. I joined fairly quickly and started attending their meetings, met a lot of great people at the Chipeta chapter in Montrose, people like Bill Harris, and I'm forgetting other people's names, but Bill Harris in particular. And we would do surveys, we would do various projects together, and we had the privilege one year to dig what became known as the Harris site after Bill Harris, who had found it. And we employed Cass Chipeta chapter members as crew people on that dig, and we found a pretty interesting site on the Uncompahgre Plateau just west of Montrose. And it was an incredible experience working with the Cass people in Chipeta. Well, then the job ended in Montrose, and I eventually moved back over to the East Slope, to Aurora, and immediately I went and joined the Denver chapter of Cass, and enjoyed coming to the monthly meetings. The speakers were always great. I remember one of the speakers, and I'm drawing a blank on his name now, but he was a history professor at CU Boulder. But he had been digging at Caesarea Maritima in Israel. And I was just enthralled by the work that he did there at Israel. And lo and behold, years later, I've been going to Israel myself, and I've been digging at a couple of sites in Israel for the last 10 years. I enjoyed I think the thing I enjoyed most about the Cass and the chapters is the people, avocational archaeologists. I've had a great deal of respect for avocational archaeologists, and I use that word instead of amateur, which implies something less than that they're barely above a collector. And all of the avocational archaeologists that I've known have been excellent archaeologists, and I've learned a lot from them. And they have taught me a lot, and I enjoy the collaboration and partnership that I've had with them. Again, it's the people. I guess the people of the Denver, the people of the Chipeta chapter. It's been them. It's they who has had the most impact on me. I mean, collectively, I always enjoyed the members' night. I haven't been a faithful attendant at the Denver chapter meetings over the last few years, simply because I had conflicts on the same time as those meetings, and I wasn't able to attend. I think now that I'm retired, I think it'd be great if I re-engage. But I knew a lot of cast members, Chipeta and Denver chapter, who some of them are no longer living, and I miss them all the time. I went to work when I came back over to Aurora with a company called Powers Elevation, and my boss at the time was a woman named Marcia Tate. And Bill Tate was her husband, and Bill was an avocational archaeologist, but I wouldn't even use that word avocationalist. I mean, Bill is as much an archaeologist as I was. He had a good knowledge and understanding of the landscape, and boy, he could find things where I couldn't sometimes. And I think of Bill Tate, Marcia Tate, of course, who is still living. Bill is no longer living. Ivel Hager, I think, what a great guy he was. Bill Hammond. I'm desperately trying to think of other names. Those are the ones that come immediately to mind. And there are some good people today in the Denver chapter, and I should re-engage here soon and get involved. In fact, I think I'd like to come to the members' night this year. I guess that's where the video is going to be shown, so shoot, I ought to be there to see that.
Jack Warner. Jack is a retired research and development engineer in telecommunications. His love for the outdoors and hiking led him to travel and explore Colorado. And on one of those explorations in 2008, he was at the Fairplay Ranger Station and found a book on Colorado archaeology. Inside that book, the Colorado Archaeological Society was mentioned several times, and he was intrigued enough to search out the organization and find out more. After he attended his first meeting, he knew that he wanted to become a member, and the rest is history. Jack has served as both the state and Denver chapter presidents, and he's helped grow our society through his hard work and enthusiasm.
I joined CAS, and shortly thereafter, within less than a year, somebody made an announcement that if you were interested in getting involved in an archaeological dig at a place called Blackfoot Cave in southeastern Douglas County, we should just show up on this Saturday at a certain place. And after the meeting, I said to myself, geez, I can't believe that anybody could do this. I thought you need a lot of specialized training. So I went to the person, and they assured me that you get training on the site, and you're perfectly welcome. And that appealed to me. So I went out to the rendezvous. We went out to the site, and I expected largely to be a gopher, to go around and run errands or something for the experienced people, but that's not what happened. What happened is we were given an experienced cast member, and there were three of us that were relatively new, and we, with survey equipment, laid out a new square that was identified as an area that would be likely a good place to dig. And it was amazing. Within the first hour, we found about 7 artifacts, prehistoric artifacts, and I was hooked. And from then on, the most important part of CAS for me has been the field work. I ended up working 6 dig seasons at Blackfoot Cave. I also ended up doing a special study of how Blackfoot Cave fit into all the other prehistoric, early archaic, over 5,000 years sites in the entire Denver Basin. That study was published in the Southwestern Lore, as well as the Blackfoot Cave dig report was published by the lead person on that dig. And I met a great many people who were very interesting. Many of them had a lot of experience with digging and archaeology. That led me into a deeper study of the early American studies, the first people that originally came to Colorado and to America. I managed to go down to Santa Fe at a very large conference and focused on the early population of the U.S. And I managed to meet many of the very famous archaeologists who are in the literature at the Smithsonian and so on, professors in universities. And it was a fantastic experience. And what I found amazing about archaeology compared to my former job in research and development was that whenever I have a question or I need some explanation, I can just put an email out or call at the telephone, and these people almost immediately give me replies. So my network of being able to do research and to find out things expanded greatly, largely because I got involved with doing the field archaeology and the dig at Blackfoot Cave. I also, at Blackfoot Cave, I was part of a 3-person team. We were digging very deep in a very wet-bottomed square, and we came up with a Paleo Indian lancelet type point called a Jimmy Allen point, which is dated at somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 years ago. It's by far the oldest artifact found in this area, and that was really exciting. And I also think that what happened is I live at Kenkill Ranch, and Kenkill Ranch is a site, a place that has 10 documented major archaeological digs in the past. And of those, I believe 7 of them were done by Cass entirely, but since then, I've become affiliated with the Historical Society at Kenkill, and we recently did a salvage archaeology dig about 18 months ago on our own, based with experienced people from Cass as well as people that we trained from our Historical Society, and we also got paid help from professional archaeologists, which kind of led the dig. And we managed to find a roasting pit where people were roasting vegetable matter as well as meat, carbon dated from 200 AD. And we managed to salvage that site, which was being destroyed by mountain bikers, frankly, inadvertently, but nevertheless they were causing massive erosion, and that site would have vanished in a period of about a year or two if we hadn't gone in there and managed to do the salvage archaeology. So my experience with Cass is very much related to field work, and in particular digs and lab work that's associated with it. And of course, I'm a very strong believer in publication of the findings. I'm actually kind of embarrassed. I did a survey of the entire Front Range of sites that had artifacts that are more than 5,000 years old, which is really archaic in the definition around here. And the documentation on many of these sites is very slim or almost non-existent. And I think that a person who does digs and field work of that type, it's super important to document so others can benefit from the knowledge that's gained. Okay, I mentioned that documentation is very important. And let me just take you through a couple of examples which I think things were well done that Cass was involved in. The first one is the Blackfoot Cave dig. The dig occurred over a period of 8 dig seasons, which essentially is from May to November, depending on the weather. And this site also is subject to water flooding in the spring, so you got to let it dry out enough so you can actually dig dirt and not just mud or soup. And then after we found a lot of artifacts, thousands of artifacts. And of course, we went through standard procedures of bagging the artifacts, recording all the detailed information. And then they took them to the laboratory, which in this case, Douglas County has their own archaeology lab. That was a big help, and we were really good partners with Douglas County. We also obtained the grant from History Colorado for some of the funding in order to support our work. And over the winter months, when we weren't digging, we would have teams of people, usually on Saturdays and Sundays or sometimes holidays, go down to the Douglas County lab, and we would work with the people who have jobs there. And they work sometimes during the week as well. And we would go through and we would clean up the artifacts. We would do the detailed measurement, the weights, the type of material. And then we database all that in a standardized database. And then we finally finished the job. We would then use that database to do statistical analysis on types, for example, how many points versus scrapers, what kind of materials were used, and so on. And then we took all of that and we published a large 8.5 by 11 format book, and that book was probably about 1.25 inches thick. And we submitted that to History Colorado in order to satisfy the grant requirements for the money they had given us. And it was a substantial amount of money. It was tens of thousands of dollars. And then from that, then we took a summary of it. And in the fall of 2018 Southwestern Lore, our lead archaeologist, which was Neil Hauser, along with our team, we published a large summary of what was found at the site and to record it so that it's in a format that's available. It may interest you. I actually did a search once on where Southwestern Lore is available. And not only is this available in libraries locally and in Colorado, but I actually found references to this book in France in Australia and in other countries. So there are people who, if they care to do the research, can find this information. Now it turns out I have a very strong interest in the early population of Colorado and the United States by people. And so I did a special study of our oldest artifacts. I looked at artifacts from Blackfoot Cave that were at least 5,000 years old. That's defined by our archaeology community as what they call early archaic, or earlier is called Paleo-Indian. And I looked at all the documented sites I could find in the entire Front Range of Colorado. And I did an analysis of those that had at least 100 artifacts that were 5,000 years and older. And I compared the results from Blackfoot Cave with those sites that had over 100. And I also put a map together in the document that shows the distribution of these sites. So I shouldn't try to do this live, I guess. That's what this shows 27 sites that had early archaic artifacts, but only 4 of them had over 100. And so this allows people to gain that knowledge and to use it for future work. And actually it's been built upon already. I've run across references to our articles about some work that was done in the far northern, near the Wyoming border of Colorado, to show also the distribution of early archaic and older peoples. So it was kind of already bared some fruit in the academic literature. And I think documenting then is very important, because somebody that joins CAS today can read this and start out at a much higher plane of knowledge than we could originally before we started these projects.
John Kent. In 1987, John joined the Denver chapter after he'd been introduced to the society as a professor of the Metropolitan State University of Denver, and having just moved to the area, he was looking for activities that he could introduce his students to and have them gain experience. CAS provided that experience and opened up new possibilities and a network of people who would help him and his students. He would later take on the office of vice president and the president of the Denver chapter, giving back and introducing new and old members alike to the realm of archaeology. John has recently retired from his position at Metro, but he continues to volunteer his time on many projects around the state.
When I first came to Denver, I didn't know too many people, of course, and I knew even less about Colorado archaeology. So I was looking for a place to bring my intro archaeology students out to the field to see what was going on and to learn a little bit more myself. And we went out to the Swallow site, which was being excavated by Doug Medina and Ivel Hager and Fred Rathburn and a whole bunch of other people that I met and were very nice to me and allowing my students to go out, and just handed me a trowel and said, get to work. And I said, great. That's exactly what we wanted. And I was impressed by the professionalism that these guys were showing, you know, as they were conducting the field work. So I brought people out there for years afterwards, and I decided to join about a year later. And I wanted to be associated with those people because I respected what they were doing. I came out to the site with some students. The first day I was out there, I saw this big man sitting right in front of a back dirt pile, and he had a screen legs rather, on the back dirt pile, and he was tilting towards, he was sitting on a camper's chair, and he was sitting on the chair and sort of just laid back and mellow about the whole process. And people were bringing him buckets of dirt to screen, you know, with tags for each provenience entity that was involved. And he was just talking to people and meeting people and very nice to my students, making them laugh and making them feel right at home. And I said, this is a good guy. It was Ivel Hager. I said, this is a good guy. That was, I'll never forget that. It was, you know, it was just one of those people moments. And that's what makes this whole organization work well for me, is the people in it. Yeah.
A couple of things occur to me, and I'm going to make reference to one experience that we had. When History Colorado moved into its current building, Cass was asked if we would like to help with hands-on activities for the public that were coming for the grand opening. And Denver Cass spearheaded that, along with a lot of cooperation from Indian Peaks and in Boulder, and from Pikes Peak in Colorado Springs. That was a neat experience. It took a fair amount of coordination to make sure that we weren't duplicating other activities that other organizations were doing. But I would like to see more opportunity for interaction, particularly with Pikes Peak in Colorado Springs, Indian Peaks, and the Northern Colorado chapter, and occasionally the Pueblo chapter. Those are all within driving distance for certain activities of members of Denver Cass. As part of the Alice Hamilton raffles, which we will be resuming, I think, probably next year, I sometimes went to Northern Colorado or Pueblo with that year's raffle prize to encourage raffle sales. And that was always fun to visit with people from the other chapters. That would be my first thought. My second thought would be, how can we gain more visibility? Because if people don't know about Cass, those who might become interested in archaeology, as I did over the years, aren't going to know what they're missing out on. Terry Hoff, who belonged here in Denver until she and Tom moved to Cortez, talked about the fact they learned about Cass from a brochure they picked up at the Welcome Center in Fruita shortly after they had moved from Minnesota to Colorado. My husband Terry will tell you that he learned about Cass from an adult education class in Douglas County back in the mid-1970s, and that it was taught by a Cass member, and that's how he learned about Cass. In today's social media world, those two options still exist, but probably aren't the way that most people learn about organizations. I do know that we try to maintain connections with various archaeology professors so that those who may be studying archaeology in college learn that Cass exists. So greater visibility, I think, would be helpful in attracting more members, and when you have more members, you have the people to staff the activities that members are looking for.
I have become convinced over the years that an organization that has a function such as Cass is a product of numbers of people. It needs enough people to support the activity, and the more people you've got, the more in varied different activities you can enjoy. You can provide things, because not everybody wants to go out and dig. Not everybody wants to sit in a laboratory. Not everybody wants to go to meetings all the time. But if you've got enough people, you can do all of those things. So my objective for Cass would be to increase its membership, to have enough people who want to do these different things that we can provide for them. And then along with that would be to open up more chapters statewide to bring more people in from different cities, different towns, different areas of the state.
I believe, and they may already be doing this, I believe Cass needs to be one of the leaders. They need to be proactive in historic preservation. A lot of our antiquities in this state and in other states across the country are rapidly going away for one reason or another, either through development or illicit collecting or some other means. And I think Cass should be again, one of the leaders, along with professional archaeologists, state and federal agency archaeologists, to lead the way and work to help preserve the antiquities of the state, because they're vital to understanding it. I've looked at the historic preservation and the history and the archaeology of a particular region as capturing the soul of a community. And sometimes that soul may go back just a few hundred years, or decades actually, and sometimes it goes back thousands of years. And we need to work together to make sure that that record, that heritage, does not go away, and it's there for all of our descendants.
Where would I like to see Cass headed for in the future? It turned out in 2014 and 15, I was elected president of the state Cass. And I thought long and hard before my first meeting, which was that January, or the first year there, of what directions I wanted to lead. And I came up with 3 major points, which are the major focuses of my presidency. And I really think we made progress in all of them. And I would like Cass to continue with these, and 3, and I'd like to add a 4th. The 3 points are, first of all, emphasize field archaeology. I think the doing of archaeology, and not just seeing talks and going on tours, leads to much deeper commitment, and also it's easier to recruit people. And what I'm talking about is participation in archaeological surveys, participation in the test digging at sites that are promising, doing the actual archaeological digs, and then taking the artifacts to the laboratories, doing formal curation and database work, do analysis of the artifacts, and then publish the results. I think all of those steps are doable by Cass people, and we have done, many of us have done those things. And I've found that over the years, when you do that, it's easier to recruit people, because people get excited when you tell them, you know, you could be part of an archaeological dig team. When over the years, I've recruited quite a few people to Cass through that method of being involved in the actual field archaeology. I particularly find it's appealing to the younger people, people that are, say, 40 or younger. Cass is an older organization. It's good to get the new blood in there. And I think that that's the second point, by the way, was to grow Cass, and largely by recruitment. And I think the way to effectively recruit is what I call mentoring. That is, you actually, you don't just say to somebody, hey, why don't you come to a Cass meeting and tell them where it is. You actually make arrangements to meet them, perhaps go to dinner before the meeting, take them to the meeting, sit next to them, kibitz during the meeting. Or if it's not a meeting, maybe I've done this with lab. I've taken young college people coming out of college in biology, took them to the lab where we were doing Blackfoot Cave, and they became excited about doing volunteer laboratory work in archaeology, a field in which they had no experience at all. So I think this idea of recruiting by mentoring is valuable, and I might want to say during the period when I was president, Cass increased its numbers by about 17%. Since COVID, it's been in decline, and I think we need to really refocus on an efforts for recruitment. The third thing was inter-chapter cooperation and projects. When I joined Cass, I loved it, but it was very much each chapter did their own thing. There was very little cross work in the chapters. And I encouraged people to work across chapters and invite other chapters to participate. So at Blackfoot Cave, we didn't just have Cass members from Denver, we had people from Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Boulder, and once in a while visitors from the Western Slope. And I think that's been valuable. Meanwhile, through the kind of a serendipity, I helped arrange that we could get access to do archaeological digs at Champagne Springs and Mitchell Springs near Cortez, Colorado in the southwest, Anasazi architecture of pit houses to villages. And again, we invited all the chapters of CAS to participate in that. It was, prior to that, it was only to the chapter that's based in Cortez. So I think those are the three principles that I think I'd like to see continued on as emphasis in CAS in the future. And then the other thing is kind of an oddball thing, but I was the chapter president of the Denver chapter for 5 years and the state for 2 years. And I've noticed over that time, and this trend has even increased since COVID in the 2020 period, and that is we are growing well in the smaller cities and towns, but we are declining in the bigger cities. And I think a lot of that has to do with the undesirability of people to travel who live in the suburbs into the core of a city at night, and then they have to drive home late. And the other thing is just plain the congestion of the cities. When I first started this work in around 2008 and 9, I could make it from my house in Ken Carroll Ranch in the far southwest suburbs to the museum in Denver in 45 minutes. Nowadays, to make a meeting that starts at 7 o'clock, it would take probably an hour and 10 minutes because of the congestion and the growth of the city. And that's without construction, which there seems to be always construction. So the bottom line is I think you might want to look at splitting chapters that currently occupy a single city. Like in Denver, we have one chapter. Maybe we should have 2 or maybe even 4 chapters representing the different quadrants of this area. And I think people would be much more comfortable to go closer to where they live to experience the CAS experience.
I would like to see more interactions in this post-COVID milieu we're in right now. I think we're coming out of it really nicely. A number of folks are getting involved in different projects, which is exactly what people need to see happening in order to have a motive for joining the organization. I think if you're just sitting around talking about things or listening to lectures, that's okay, but it's not enough. I think you have to have involvement, and I think people have to feel like they're learning how to do archaeology the right way. And I would like to see us getting involved in research once more and doing some more excavations. Some of the excavations that CAS Denver has done in the past have been top-notch and have contributed significantly to the archaeological record, especially here on the Front Range. And I would like to see us continue that. I think that's our strength and our future.
So now I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of our speakers this evening for their reflections on what the Colorado Archaeological Society has meant to them, and for offering insights on what directions that we might take going forward as an organization. I'd also like to thank all the board members who helped with Members Night this evening, as well as their service over the past 2 years during the difficult times of the pandemic. It's not easy for an organization like this, who's typically used to meeting in the field and face-to-face, to have to do everything virtually for 2 years. So here's to hoping the next 2 years we can get back to what we do best. So I'd like to take this opportunity now to offer a few thoughts that I have about the direction of the chapter going forward. I think if we look back at 75 years of history of the Denver chapter and Colorado Archaeological Society in general, we can see a clear shift in focus of what our organization is about. And I think that we need to continue to reframe that focus in the 21st century. And one of the most important things, as I mentioned in the opening remarks, is the diverse background that our membership has, right? We have folks from all over the spectrum of employment background and educational background, and I think that's critical to maintaining the importance of the Colorado Archaeological Society and what we do. Obviously, we're not so field-based anymore, right? We don't have large excavations that we undertake. It's not necessarily about going on the private land and making collections and things like that. But what we can offer is this networking for both professional and non-professional archaeologists. And I think that's really our strength and our direction going forward. So in closing, I'd like to thank our hosts at History Colorado who provided the room and space for us to host the members' night and potluck this evening. I'd also like to thank our board members who helped organize the event and provided food. And finally, also to Joe Garrett, who provided the audio and visual for the presentation that we saw this evening. So thank you to everyone, and good night.